Recruiting is an industry that is going to become even more important than it is today because the competition for talent is only going to increase. You have to believe that the actual risk is a lot lower because you have so much belief in yourself that you're going to go figure it out. Every fundraise is quite different. The more we were able to prove out the company, the better the fundraisers went. If you're in a different market where there's not as many fast-growing companies, because it's less competitive and there's less best practices, even the best outcomes are not as good as the best outcomes in the best market.
Speed is key.
Yes, speed while retaining quality.
David, of all the different industries and sectors that you can build in, why did you choose recruiting?
Great question. Two reasons. One, when we first got started, we wanted to build in an area that we felt we had a personal reason to be building in. And a lot of the experiences that Ashan and I had previously working were all kind of created by us. Like we felt we had to go and create the job that we were excited about, and we had to go and create an opportunity that we thought uniquely resonated with us. And so the flip side, or the underlying problem that we thought we could solve, is that we could create more of those opportunities for more people. We wanted to tackle that problem, that idea of like matching people with the best possible opportunity for them. And we also wanted to do that in a way that it's a real business or sustainable business. And so that then pretty quickly brought us into recruiting software of tackling that problem from the business's side. And then the second part is, I think that recruiting is an industry that is going to become even more important than it is today because the competition for talent is only going to increase. And so we think it's probably the most important area that is forward-looking for where the future of the economy will go as well.
I love that answer. I think you're absolutely right. I think what I'm seeing as a recruiter and as a user of your product, it definitely is getting more and more competitive to find great talent. I think there's a bigger emphasis now more than ever on looking for more senior level talent. Just so we can unpack it, let's start from the very beginning. How you met your co-founder. How did this idea even come to fruition? I think you guys were part of Y Combinator as well. So I'd love to go there. Let's unpack that for the audience.
My co-founder, Ishan, and I met in 2020 during COVID, right when COVID started, actually. We initially met virtually, and we started building kind of different products together, really just for fun. Like we were having fun building projects. It was a lot of kind of mobile apps, very consumer focused. We built one that was like an audio sharing app, so you could share short audio snippets. It was in the Clubhouse era, so people were talking about that space a ton. And we thought we could kind of combine, the virality of TikTok with the audio first nature of Clubhouse. That app did not work. I think the main takeaway is that audio is not a very engaging format for short form. It's much better to develop longer form thoughts and ideas. And so we stopped working on that. There was a few other people involved in that too. And then we built a music discovery app, and that started doing pretty well. And so we got over 50,000 users. You could basically swipe through music, discover new songs. It would sync with your Spotify. It was a pretty cool app, but most importantly, it kind of gave us the confidence that we were ready to go and build full time. And so Ashan ended up dropping out of college. I graduated early, and then we did YC in summer of 2022. And when we applied to YC, we had this kind of broader notion in mind of kind of what I hinted at before, that recruiting is going to just continue to increase in importance as talent markets get more competitive. And this was pre-ChatGPT. So this was before the whole world was talking about LLMs and everyone knew this was going to be the next thing. And the first version of the idea that we built was actually a talent marketplace. And so we were kind of manually onboarding talent. We were doing our own sourcing. We like to joke we were like the world's worst recruiting agency. We went through the motions, and that was really important because over those like 6 months, we got a pretty deep understanding of the workflows, and we started building some of our own tooling that we wanted to use, which was powered by LLMs. And then shortly thereafter, there was a big leap forward with the ChatGPT launch. GPT 3.5 came out, and the model started improving pretty quickly. And so we decided to just focus on the software component and continue with the marketplace. And we're just focused on building software to help our customers find the best people for the roles they were searching for, and then the workflow that goes beyond that. And so that all happened in 2022. And then in the years thereafter, we started building. And then I think 2023 is probably when we first connected.
Yeah, we definitely did connect back in 2023. Very much early on in your journey, which was fun to meet you and learn more about what you were building. And for the viewers and listeners, our firm Harris Clark is a is a customer of yours, and we love the product. We think it's doing some great things, and we will continue being a supporter. But just sort of diving into the world of recruiting, because you're building a product that ultimately is put it this way, as a recruiter and as an investor, I know how painful it is to find great talent. Even for us, like we are hiring at the moment for Harrison Clark. We're looking for recruiters, salespeople, even people to look after this podcast. It's very difficult to find great people. How do you think a product like yours can solve that problem?
Yeah. The there's two advantages we provide to our customers. One is absolute and one is relative. And so the absolute advantage is that our goal is to build software that lets you find people that you otherwise wouldn't. And so what that really means is that kind of with traditional methods of searching tend to rely on hard filters or hard keyword based matches. And so the almost every kind of existing search platform or like pre-LLM search platform essentially has the user set those filters and then kind of narrows the talent pool based on that. What's unique about Juicebox is that you can still do those filter based searches, but you can also do kind of much broader pure natural language based searches and then re-rank all the search results based on specific matches. And so the number one result should be a substantially better search result than the number 100 search result, which kind of gives you absolutely better matches. But then perhaps the even more important part is the relative piece. Recruiting is unique in that it's a zero-sum game. Only one person can hire someone at a given point in time. And so the other thing that we help our customers with is we help you get to that right person faster. And the speed matters because it means that someone else doesn't have time to recruit that person in the same amount of time. And so we both try to make an absolutely better product for the true search use case, but then two, we want to give our customers an advantage over the other firms they may be competing with for that talent.
David, what's the unique selling point? I mean, the speed is definitely key, and identifying and uncovering the right talent quick enough, and not having to sift through many profiles to see which one's the right one. Because I remember when you and I first met, you called it people GPT, and I think maybe that's still an element of the product. But ultimately, when we think of Juicebox, what would you say is the key selling point? What's the one unique thing? Maybe it isn't unique, but you're very good at it.
So when we think about the product or what we want it to do, the feeling that we want our customers to have is that it is actually doing some of the work for them. And so that very concretely, some of the work that we used to have to do manually is now being completed by Juicebox's AI. And so that's the goal that what we have for every customer that we work with. I'd say the most impactful way we get there is through that fully text-based assessment of each profile. And so when you do a search on Juicebox, you can rely on the search to search through every single potential search result and manually assess them as a good fit or a bad fit for the given role, kind of like we would as a human if we looked at each of those profiles and the given criteria. And the reason that's possible is because of LLMs and kind of the intelligence or reasoning ability that we get with them, being able to deploy those to those profiles at scale. To my knowledge, we're the only platform that does it at that scale. There are like other companies in this space as well, but everyone has kind of a slightly different approach on how they solve for that problem.
Are you using the platform yourself to recruit for Juicebox?
Yeah, over half of our team is Juicebox hired, which I think is a pretty good stat. That being said, there's a founder friend of mine whose team is a bit larger. I think they're around 35 people, and he hired literally almost everyone on his team through Juicebox. So he continues to beat me in Juicebox hires so far.
um, what does that mean for the industry at large? I mean, do you see that the more and more you develop this product, the less of a need for a human in the loop?
So I think like the human in the loop, it will be right now, oftentimes human in the loop is driven by like necessity of when basically the AI is not good enough. And so currently a lot of human in the loop systems use the human as a safeguard, as a kind of stop in case it goes in the wrong direction or to bring the system back on track. I think a better version of human in the loop is that the human is consistently informed, but does not need to take any action. And so rather than call to action for the human being, we think the AI is going in the wrong direction, please fix it. It should be, here are the latest updates, here's what it's achieved over the past 7 days. If that sounds good to you, it's going to continue running, or you can give it additional data to take it in a different direction. I think that, yes, the systems will become more autonomous. They will be doing more work on their own, but that work will also be pretty defined to a specific scope. And so that scope might be once a search strategy is created, continuing to run that strategy, engaging talent, and responding to initial messages in order to get the first call set up. And so I think a lot of the work will continue to be more candidate facing or customer facing, and perhaps less time interfacing with search tools.
Who are your ideal customer profiles?
When we started, it was very focused on the venture backed or startup community. And so everyone from venture backed companies with small recruiting teams, even founders recruiting agencies that were kind of active in that space as well. It continues to be a large share of our customer base, but nowadays it's expanded in kind of a bunch of different directions. And so we work with over 4,000 customers now, ranging from kind of local recruitment agencies to Fortune 500 enterprises. And in some ways, their recruiting needs all overlap in that they want to attract the best talent and they want to attract that talent quickly. And in other ways, they are quite different from, say, one of the foundational AI labs has like very different challenges than they face than, say, an industry where there's a shortage of qualified workers, say, like the nursing industry in the US.
Do you feel that the world of recruiting is going to change over the next 5 years? The advance of AI, perhaps even with robotics and super intelligence, AI is accelerating at such a fast rate. Is there a world where the need for humans to identify the candidates in any stage of your process and have that communication, place the I mean, there's products like Merco, for example, that have an AI element to it. Obviously, the product's very different to what you're building, and I get that. But ultimately, are we getting closer to a world where the way recruiting is done is going to change, where there will be less of a need of humans to be involved in the process?
I think it depends heavily on what type of roles are being recruited for, and what the dynamic of the talent market is for that role. And so I think the roles where there will perhaps be more automation and will be more kind of autonomous systems are especially in roles where the particularly hourly roles or roles where the traditional way that the role is filled is primarily through inbound applications.
Yeah.
Because when relying on like the inbound component, there's a lot more like one can do with someone is more inclined to do an AI interview, or someone is more inclined to provide information via text because they are already indicating their interest in the role and want to fill the role. Now, I think that changes a bit for roles that are typical full-time roles where the employer is actively hunting for the right talent for it. And I think that'll continue to be the case because if one employer is kind of providing, say, an AI interview experience, which has no human in the loop or no human interactions, that might result in a worse candidate experience than if another employer has a kind of very human-led, relationship-built recruiting process. And so, especially in markets where the fight for talent is quite competitive, I think each company has an incentive to retain that edge and retain that relationship they build with the candidate. In fact, do so even more strongly than they have historically. And so I think as platforms like Juicebox or in general like AI search software gets better, the time and effort we spend on the recruiting process itself and the candidate facing part of that process will deepen even further. Because in the end, what we need the candidate to do is accept the offer if we get to that stage. And I think a lot of that will be done through building those relationships with talent.
So Juicebox, you're catering for the latter.
That's right.
Awesome. Same. Because I believe that, to your point, inbound type roles, what we call in the recruiting industry being more company driven or employer driven roles, where the volume of candidates is far greater than the number of number of positions in the market, then those are those inbound type of roles where you could rely less on recruiters or a platform like this. But the latter being the more niche positions, the more difficult roles to fill, the skills that are harder to attain in the market. And to your point, the market is super competitive, right? So there's too many companies and all of them they're vying for the best talent. Your product is uniquely positioned to find that great candidate. Now I'm going to ask you a controversial question. How do you compete with the likes of LinkedIn?
Far majority of our customers have existing LinkedIn subscriptions and licenses, and our pitch is not get rid of your LinkedIn. I think our goal is to provide like an additional workflow and a workflow that adds value in a different way. And so our goal is not to provide a profile database. Rather, our goal is to help with the workflow of searching through a set of profiles. And so if we can kind of be measured against the time saved that would otherwise be spent searching for the same profiles or getting to the same level of engagement, that's where our customers tend to see the strongest results. Because I think we even have like a testimonial from one customer who used to do sourcing sessions with his team. It would be an hour or so, and they would find like 10 to 15 qualified profiles. Now they can do the same thing in like a 5-minute sprint using some of the automations on Juicebox. And so really our focus is on workflow and how quickly we can get you to the same result rather than kind of competing with the core of LinkedIn's offerings.
Speed is key more than anything.
Yes, yeah, speed and workflow, and then I guess like the speed while retaining quality, because oftentimes or traditionally there's this trade-off, right? Like it's like if you increase the speed, the quality decreases, and you have to find that right balance. But I think that trade-off is no longer necessarily true. Like you can actually get speed and quality at the same time.
I agree. I think that's definitely the case. When you think of the data that you are capturing and the ones that you're presenting to your customers like us, where is that data coming from?
Yeah, so Juicebox works with third-party data partners. So we aggregate a bunch of data. Effectively, we license that data, and that's kind of one of our largest expenses is to aggregate as much of that as we can. And so a lot of that ends up being public profile data, contact data, and more that we're able to aggregate in that way.
And you're generating all the necessary information to be able to reach out to these individuals, email addresses, phone numbers, etc.
That's right. And that's also been an interesting development in the space of like, I'd say email outreach for many candidates has become their preferred way as well of interacting with new opportunities and managing those. And then I think at the same time, there's like a lot of the sophistication that has been built on the sales side is now being applied to the recruiting side as well. And so, and I think that'll continue to be the case. Like we've seen customers go as creative as like including gifting campaigns as part of their email outreach to like candidates claim like a box of cookies, et cetera. So there's a lot happening there. And I think that'll continue mirroring what's been happening on the sales side too, particularly with engagement. And yeah, we provide primarily email addresses and phone numbers. And I'd say the most heavily used format we see is definitely on the email side.
Right, David, let's step away from Juicebox for a second. Now we got a
For
good
sure.
picture of the product, what you're building. It's all exciting and I love it. But being a founder in today's market, it's challenging. It always is challenging. But for yourself and your co-founder, what are the biggest challenges you're facing in building a tech business in Silicon Valley today?
So I think the challenges have changed significantly over based on the period of time we were at in the company. For almost 2 years, or pretty much exactly 2 years, the company was just Ishan and myself. And so we were building the first version of the product, iterating, going back and forth every single day on what the right functionality looks like and where we needed to get to. Part of that was driven by necessity. We had not raised a significant amount of capital, and so we couldn't afford to hire in the way we would have wanted to. But then a lot of that was also just driven by us believing that we had the fastest iteration speed. And so we actually got to a point where we were making revenue, we had enough funding to be able to hire more people, but we chose not to for that time because rather than investing in the hiring process, we wanted to make sure we could continue to iterate on product faster. And that actually matched like advice we got from YC at the time. And then we ended up hiring, and our founding engineer, Minshu, joined a few months later in summer of 2024, summer of last year. But yeah, for a long time, it was kind of the fact that it was pretty hard to do things with two people, but also that it gave us that speed advantage. And then the problems pretty quickly changed as the company started scaling. I think now a lot of my focus is on our own hiring and us building the team ourselves because we need to scale that significantly to match the customers that we have. And that's like, in a way, some of the downsides of a product-led growth company as well is that you have a little bit less control over your scale because if it comes inbound and people just check out, that means you can have a significant increase in customers in a fairly short amount of time and not necessarily have the resources to support all of them in the way you want to.
Sure.
And so for a while, we were kind of playing catch up on that, building the team, building our CSM function in order to match some of the growth. And then at the same time now building out our management layer and like some of the leadership in the company too. I'd say a lot of the problems have now shift focus towards the hiring side of things.
Was PLG led a choice, or do you feel like it was a necessity for this type of product?
It was a choice. I think it would have been very hard to have the same growth without PLG. And the main reason for that is that actually two things. One, HR tech historically has not had PLG. So almost like every HR tech product is the opposite of PLG, very like top-down sales. In fact, like you probably aren't even going to get a demo in the first call of discovery. And so historically, HR tech as a whole, and then even recruiting tech specifically, has not been very product led and instead very sales led, targeting the VP or the decision maker at a large company. We intentionally wanted to be different than that. We did not want to kind of follow that same playbook. And we thought that our space is actually very well suited to being PLG because the time to value on the platform is quite quick. It's like fairly easy to show a customer a successful moment of I found a profile or this
Yeah.
person actually matches my rec. And I think that like speed to value, how quickly you can show that value is the most important decision point in whether to be a PLG or not. Because if your speed to value is slow, like you're not able to show that value quickly or it only builds after a few months, it's very hard to keep that self-serve engagement. Versus when it's fast, I think it ends up working quite well with PLG. And that kind of ended up being, I think, why it worked for us. Now, the second part was a journey that we learned over time, like the time to value. But I think that now when I speak with others about whether to do PLG or not, I think that's the biggest determining factor of whether it makes sense for a company is how fast can you show value.
You're absolutely right. I remember the first time you and I met in 2023, and you were in a, I think you were based in New York, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
And it was you and your co-founder in an office. And I remember when you showed me the product, and as you said, it's that moment of wow, okay, I found a profile. It's easier, right? It's easier to demonstrate that. Not sorry, easier, it's quicker to demonstrate that value, as you said, time to value. As you said, most of your hiring, well, let's say half of your hiring also has been through the product. Some or a certain amount hasn't been through the product. How have you gone about recruiting the other half that hasn't come through the product?
Yep. Yeah. We lean heavily on referrals. So we have like a whiteboard in our office that shows our referral leaderboard of how many referrals everyone has made and how many hires we've made through them. And so that's actually been our second biggest channel. And then the third channel that we lean on too is YC's job board, which nowadays we use that a little bit less, but especially like in the very early days, I think of our first 5 employees, 2 came from YC's job board, because it's still sourcing, like you still have to reach out to people, but it's a more constrained pool. And the nice part of the YC platform there is that it very much self-selects for people who actually want to be at like these very early stage companies, because otherwise they probably haven't heard of YC or ever created a profile there. And so still same concept of sourcing, but with some nice pre-selection of the startup focus, and especially for our very early hires that ended up being impactful. And then nowadays, the two main channels for us are Juicebox outbound and referral based.
As a founder, it's very easy to always be biased, right? And love the product that you're building. But if I was to ask you, what are the biggest challenges using the product yourself personally when you're hiring for your own company and using what challenges do you face?
Yeah, I think two things that we need to do better at. One is the kind of being more opinionated on how a customer should sync or save that data with their ATS or with whatever their source of truth is. And so we never fully set up our ATS in the way that we should have. We use Ashby, and so we sync the data, but it's not always super easy for me to see what is the source of truth of who we've reached out to in both Ashby and Juicebox. And so that's kind of one pain point of like integration depth and how we can kind of show the better workflow for the customer. And then the second part I think we need to continue to get better at is encouraging the user to, I myself have to remind myself, hey, I should be doing some additional sourcing today because otherwise we're not going to hit our goals. But that's still on me. And so I have to create this habit or this workflow for myself, which I think in an ideal state, Juicebox should be doing for me. And so I want the platform to be more proactive, actually recommending things more actively rather than being dependent on me going in and using it every time. Those are two areas that we're also investing in on the product side that I'm also excited about as a user. Anything on your end that you think we should be doing better or that are biggest pain points?
Well, I love the product, and the team, Harris and Clark, love the product also. I feel like you've definitely created something that is super useful. For us, what we're seeing with the product is it does uncover candidates quicker. The information that we get is very rich information, data that is super valuable. I like the fact that when I think of recruiting for our clients, one key thing that we focus on is tenure, movements around from one company to another, joining startups at what stage. For example, if you joined a certain startup, did you join that startup at a point when they were going through the building phase of building the company, or did you join after? And I think with Juicebox, what we've noticed is you can capture that data very quickly. And it's the speed and the quality kind of colliding together in a very nice, succinct way, which I like. The reason I asked you that question is because you did some of your hiring outside of Juicebox. So it sounds
Mhm.
like it wasn't so much the lack of the right features, it was more of the use of the product, because you're also a founder, busy doing other things. And naturally, you can sit there and use the product all day and probably build your entire team, or ultimately you need to hire. So if the best talent comes through the door, you'll hire them so that you have that referral system. But for me, I think the product is great. Have you thought about how the product is going to evolve over time in terms of, do you see this becoming a CRM, ATS? I believe you have a CRM type of feature in it, but do you see the product turning into a place where you could displace other products for recruitment agencies, products like Bullhorn and other CRM products that exist currently?
Yup, yeah, it's an interesting question because I think there's like basically there's two ways for us to expand. One is in the depth of the search process. So how deep can we go on that? How deep can we go on sourcing? Can we kind of own the whole market for sourcing? And the market for sourcing is actually pretty large because there's, I think, fairly high willingness to pay for it because it makes a big impact on what the outcomes are. It adds a lot of value. And then two, it's also a space where it's like very competitive of like having the best sourcing tool actually matters because it means it directly impacts the quality of talent that one can find. And so that's, I think, our main argument for staying in that space and going deeper and deeper in it. And that's the primary amount of our time and focus. Kind of other potential path of expanding is what you mentioned as well, of like the breadth of the product. So how far can we go? There, our goal is we want to make sure that the kind of we can continue improving the core search by getting more data from other places. And so CRM is one element of that. ATS integrations is another element of that. We don't plan on building our own ATS, but we want to continue to deepen the partnerships we have with ATSs to also help feed the data back into the platform in terms of how well we can help a customer search, how personalized is that search, what information do we take into account. And then I think on the recruiting agency side, it's actually an interesting category as well because the recruiting agencies, as you mentioned, often have like a CRM as their source of truth rather than a kind of ATS platform. And oftentimes ATS are kind of integrated into the CRM. And I think that is an area in which we'd be able to much more likely serve as a full stack solution where I think some of that functionality already exists, some of it we still need to build. There, I think there's more workflows that we can support for our customers than on the corporate ATS side.
Yeah, the reason I asked that question is because when I think of our pain points as recruiters, we have too many tools, right? I'm guilty of always coming up with another idea for the team, and they're getting to the point where they don't want another tool. I think what Juicebox does really well, and I think is probably something that hopefully is on your roadmap to continue indexing on, is that signal to noise ratio.
Mhm.
And you do that really, really well. And what I mean by that is you're able to find the best talent and uncover the best talent quickly. When I think about when I first started recruiting 16, 17 years ago, my problem was I never wanted to just send the first resume that I see, or the best first resume I see, right? I always had this fear or paranoia to keep going and not leave a stone unturned. I think that's one thing the product does really well. It makes sure you don't leave any stone unturned. So that signal to noise ratio. And again, to extend that concept even further, I like how the product is able to give this rich data for a seasoned recruiter or a hiring manager or a talent partner. When they're looking at that information, they can quite quickly decipher whether this particular software engineer or front end engineer, whichever archetype they're looking at, I can see the companies they've worked at. I can see the tenure when they joined those companies, especially at what stage of growth was that company going through. For example, let's look at OpenAI or Anthropic or Glean. Were you part of those teams in the early stage when the building was happening, or did you come thereafter? And for me, that was a game changer. In fact, I saw that as I was walking past one of our recruiters, and I said, what's that?" And I looked at it, and I thought, "That's pretty cool." So I think that signal to noise ratio is awesome. I think for us, and I'm sure you've heard this from many of your recruiter customers, the source of truth is very important. It is very important because fundamentally that database where you house all your information, the profiles, conversations you have with all the different individuals is housed in one place. So that's why I mentioned it. I feel like the ATS integrations, I agree, you should just have APIs to do the integrations, but the CRM perhaps might be an area where you could truly dominate the market, maybe displace what's out there.
Yeah, the things we're sharing that too. I very much agree with the way you described it as well. Of signal to noise, probably most important point of search, and then the CRM gives you so much more information to provide even better signal to noise. And so it's definitely the direction we want to head in as well on like where we can show matches and how we can improve those, and then hopefully also make the reduce some of the tool fatigue of how many different tools a recruiting team needs to have.
Yeah, absolutely. David, let's go back to the time around the funding stage, right?
Mhm.
You recently raised a really strong round from Sequoia, and I'm sure other investors were also involved. Tell me a little bit about that journey for a founder. So this is less about Juicebox, less about the recruiting industry, but just the journey of a founder going through that stage where they're raising that series. It was a Series A, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
Talk to me about that, David. Like, what was that like for you and your co-founder when you were out there doing that roadshow, speaking to different investors, and also, I guess, extending that further, what were the key signals that you were getting from receiving or hearing from investors as you were walking out of those meetings? You and your founder felt confident this is going in the right direction.
Someone told me this like pretty early on, and I didn't realize that it would be true. But then now I think it's quite true. Is that the every fundraise is quite different, and you'll only realize that once you're kind of in the middle of it. And so, and there's some randomness to that as well. And so for us, the early fundraisers we had in the company were particularly hard, and the more we were able to prove out the company, the better the fundraisers went. And so what that meant concretely, or we've raised three rounds total so far. One, we raised like a pre-seed around YC, which was $1 million round. Then we raised a seed round, which was a $5 million round in the fall of 2024. And then we raised the Series A this summer, which was a larger round. It was over 30 million. Even though the round sizes increased, it actually became easier to raise those rounds because we had de-risked a lot of parts of the business and we had confidence in what we needed to present and where we needed to probably address questions, or we could kind of expect what those were as well. And so when I think back to when we raised the pre-seed or the seed, we spoke with over 100 investors for those rounds. And so we spoke with a lot of folks and then pretty quickly narrowed down based on who was interested in Juicebox and who we thought could be a good fit as well. It was a very intense process. Like over weeks, the only conversations I would do were fundraising conversations. And a lot of that is pretty repetitive as well, because it's like kind of sharing the same story about the company, sharing the same deck, etc. But it was kind of necessary because I then built an understanding of what were the questions, what were the pain points, and then they become fairly repeatable. I'd say after like the first 10 or so conversations, I could kind of model what the next 50 fundraising conversations would look like too, because a lot of it is pretty similar. And so those were my learning experiences in the early rounds. And I feel like there's often one objection that investors have that then kind of anchors the objection for that round of financing. And so for us early on, the main objection was we haven't seen a lot of big outcomes in recruiting tech. Why is this going to be different? And so really a market question. And market questions are hard to solve because it's like it's not something where you can really say, hey, actually we're in this other market, or actually here's why it's different, in a way that's really compelling. And so part of it is ultimately the investor taking a bet on why they also believe it's different. And the only reason the investor will get to confidence on that is because they have done their own reasoning or thinking on that, rather than something that we as the founder can convince them on. That was like my realization in the early rounds. And then I think the reason that was easier in the A is because at that point we'd already grown to some revenue scale where we could actually show, hey, it's possible to build a really fast growing company in this category. And there's also some kind of underlying reasons why the category has changed a bunch, and we think there can be a really large company in recruiting tech. And so that was then the case in the A. And we spoke with a much smaller number of investors. We spoke with less than 10 investors for the round total. And then we also saw a lot of pull during that time. And so it ended up being a fairly fast fundraise compared to our previous rounds where it was over larger periods of time.
I love it because the reason I'm asking is because there are many founders out there right now who are fundraising, who are at the stage that you are at in the pre-seed. And it sounds like part of this is just having super conviction in what you're building, but also the resilience and tenacity just not to give up.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'd say like especially that initial round after YC, we raised a total of 500K plus YC's 500K. And that was not like a YC successful fundraise. Like usually the successful YC companies raise a lot more than that. At the time we were, oh no, we just got started with this journey. Did we already kind of fail at it? But the one, I'm super grateful to the investors who believed in us at the time. And then two, I think it also kind of enforced some of the things I said of we stayed lean for a long time. We really thought about what matters in the product. And that ended up being an advantage later on.
So you spoke to over 100 investors. How many, obviously not specific, it's a long time ago and you spoke to many, so you don't have to give me a specific number, but when you think about them, those conversations, was it the majority were saying no? Was it come back later with ABC and we'll have a look again? What sort of reactions were you getting from people?
I guess like almost no one says like no, like everyone kind of says, oh, this might be a fit for us in the future, etc. And then I guess the far majority, especially in those early rounds, because that like the pre-seed and seed, everyone just has an incentive to continue having a good relationship. And so in a way that makes it also harder to distinguish between, in some cases, people even book follow-on calls, even though they probably don't have a strong intent of investing. And so it becomes a little bit of like a signal to noise balance as well. And then the other advantage of those rounds is oftentimes they're on safes. And so it's actually pretty easy to bring in more investors. And so we ended up having like, I guess, a strong lead in the seed, but also a good amount of other angels and investors that were interested in participating, which ended up being good too, because a lot of the angels ended up being some of the most helpful people on the cap table. And so the actual, I guess, quantity of investors, once a larger one says yes, it's fairly easy to fill up the rest. I'd say the harder part is one, if there are multiple lead investors interested, choosing between them, which ended up being the case and was an interesting decision making process too. And then two, kind of deciding who to bring on board for the remainder of the round in terms of who can add value and actually be helpful. And that value can come in many different ways, from like founders, one feels comfortable texting of just saying, hey, I'm thinking about this, can you help me with this, to others who might provide much more specific value add in terms of like customer introductions or technical advice and more.
That sounds like one hell of a journey. And as I said, there's resilience and conviction in what you're building. Was there ever a time between you and your founder where you felt this is not going to work?
When we made that pivot from the marketplace to being pure software, we reset our revenue to zero, because previously the revenue was marketplace revenue. So we reset our revenue to zero. We were just starting off building that software part, and it was pretty rough. Like if you remember, like the GPT-3 days, there was a lot of hallucination in there, and it wasn't obvious that it was going to work, but it felt like there was something cool there. And so we were excited, but I think we were aware that we were, I guess, risking a good amount, or felt like we were starting from scratch again. And in some ways that felt liberating, and in some ways that felt quite risky. So I think that was the part where I was most uncertain. And then after that, we felt like we were making steady progress, or like running towards a specific goal. And so then after that, I guess I never had that doubt again.
That's amazing. So it's a little bit like the Netflix story where most of their revenue was coming from a certain aspect of the business. It was video rentals,
Yeah.
and they decided to move to the streaming business. So you're saying that quite similar story. You had, to a certain degree, you had revenue coming in, but you changed your approach of what you're selling or how you're selling it. As far as that is concerned, was that your decision or your co-founder, or was it like a mutual decision between the both of you?
Yeah, I think we were both on the same page. Like, or we weren't super happy with the business we were doing in the form of the marketplace. We saw this potential of LLMs. We were super excited by it. We also had more fun building some of that internal tooling for ourselves. And so I think that made it a bit easier to say, this is where we want to go. We asked our investors, what do they think? We were a bit worried, oh, like they just invested in us doing this. How do they feel about us changing directions? And they're actually all super supportive. And so that then also ended up making it a bit easier. And so I think the more like we thought about it, the more obvious it became that it was the right move.
David, I'd like to sort of finish the end of this episode today with focusing more on you as a founder. And when we think about this podcast, it's called Inside the Silicon Mind because we want to get into the mind of leaders within Silicon Valley, how they think, the decisions they make. But part of this is a certain motivation or aspiration or eagerness or a vision, whatever we want to call it, to build something, to be successful. What was your driver when you were growing up? What was the thing that you were always thinking about that you want to do? Was this a part of that journey, that being an entrepreneur and building your own company?
I always knew I wanted to start something or build something. I don't specifically know why, but I think that was on my mind from a fairly early age, like definitely before college. And then in college, I pretty quickly got exposed to people who had either worked at early stage startups or started companies. And then it very immediately became clear to me that that was what I was interested in. That's where I wanted to be. And so I kind of just let myself follow that passion and that interest. The only thing I did in between was I took a gap year from college during COVID, spent that time at Snap, first as an intern, and then stayed there for 9 months. And I love the people I worked with. I learned a ton. I also realized that like the kind of larger tech environment was maybe not the right one for me. And I think that then kind of again emphasized, oh, I want to take those risks of building something and creating something. That was always pretty clear to me. And the thing that was not clear to me is whether it would end up working. And so that took some time to figure out.
What's that like? I mean, we're both founders, and I have my own reasons why I do what I do. But for you, do you think founders and being an entrepreneur, do you have a certain characteristics or certain things that maybe gives you that willingness to take those risks?
Yeah, I think there's in a way there has to be like an unreasonable belief in oneself. And I guess one has to believe in oneself more than anyone else does. And I think the reason for that is that like the risk reward of being a founder is pretty bad. The risk is pretty high. And so like the expected outcome is not that good. And so the only like variable in that oneself has a different opinion on is you have to believe that the actual risk is a lot lower because you have so much belief in yourself that you're going to go figure it out. And so in my mind, that's is like a necessary precondition in a founder is that they underestimate their own risk, or they have a higher risk tolerance because they believe so much in themselves, even to an unreasonable extent. I don't know. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. I think I used to think about this a lot when I first started out. And I remember one particular investor saying to me that the confidence has to be there. And sometimes that confidence can somehow come across as arrogance, but it's not necessarily arrogance, but you have to have this real deep belief in yourself that you're going to build something. And sometimes if it's the unknown as well, as you said, the product you're building, you're proving something that perhaps from your first few conversations with investors, it was market question, right? How are you going to build something that hasn't perhaps succeeded in the past in this particular industry? And you just got to have that conviction. For me, it's always been this thing where if it didn't work, I'll find a way to make it work. And if it really doesn't work, if I have to pivot or make some changes, I'll make it. And I've learned this from a lot of investors I work with. When they look at deal flow and we sort of share ideas on a particular opportunity to invest in, it's buying into the founder and believing that their idea is great. I love the idea, but I love the founder more. Because if the idea somehow gets to a point where it might hit a dead end, the founder is the type of person that will make it work or will pivot and make something else work. Slack was I think it was a gaming company called Slack, right? This idea of just identifying new ways and new markets or how you go and build. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think having that belief in yourself is important, and you got to tell the story. And that's another question I wanted to ask you. Perhaps it's more related to how do you engage your investors and your customers. Is founding now and being a founder and building a company, is it more storytelling or is it more engineering?
I heavily underestimated the importance of storytelling in the beginning. And I think that also hurt us in our very early fundraisers because I didn't realize to what extent that's the one of the main things that matter. And then I think one has to earn the right to not have to rely on story in the sense of like the product where that becomes meaningful enough to be a part of the story. But then even so, the really great outcomes are when there's great traction and great product, but also a great story connecting it. And so today, I don't think I'm great at storytelling. I think I'm like now okay at it, but it was definitely like something I had to learn and first realize the importance of, and then once I realized the importance of, learn how to actually do it well.
Well, I think you've done a phenomenal job, honestly, because I've seen your journey from 2023 when we first met, and I think you've built a great product, and part of it is just buying into you, honestly. I mean, we've had few conversations before we became a customer, and I'm going to be honest with you. In the beginning, I was also hesitant. If you remember in 2023, I was hesitant, not even as an investor, as just a customer, but I was hesitant because of the same reasons that you mentioned about the market. I had played around with too many products and in my time, and I was wondering, is this really going to work? But as we had more and more conversations, and I saw the product and I understood the product better, it does work. And credit to you, we've done many placements using Juicebox. So really do appreciate the product that you have built. For me, it's a combination of both storytelling and engineering, and it's important as a founder to be able to tell your story. And you're doing it all the time, right? You're not just doing it when you're fundraising or when you're speaking to customers. You're doing it when you're hiring as well. How do you convince the best engineers to come work for you? It's great to believe in the product, but they want to believe in you. So I think storytelling is really important. David, just to wrap up our episode today, it really has been a pleasure having you on. And as we were supposed to do this in person, but hopefully we'll do it at some point in the future. I think you have a studio in your office, so maybe we can record it in your office next time.
For
Um,
sure.
David, I'd love to finish off with one final question that we always ask every guest on the show. And the question is related to effectively recommending a book. I've said this 100 times on this show, but I'm a huge avid reader. I love reading. And the reason we called this podcast Inside Silicon Mind is to get into the minds of founders and investors and CEOs in this industry. Part of that is also, has there been a book for you that you've read, one that has truly resonated with you? And this is a book that I would recommend any founder to read.
So my recommendation doubles down on Silicon Valley, and my recommendation is Chip War, which is a book. I think it was trending particularly late last year or early this year. And I read it at the time, and I didn't really know what I was expecting, but I learned a ton from it, and I think about it a lot. And so Chip Ward talks about how Silicon Valley first emerged, what the first companies that were producing silicon chips, and how that industry got created. It's, I guess, factual in nature, but written in a way that it's easy to immerse oneself in, and easy to understand, some of the stories of the characters. And the reason I think it's particularly relevant today is because a lot of the people who created Silicon Valley or the industry also helped shape the industry of venture capital, and where the names on a lot of the large investment firms actually come from, and who those people are, and what their story is. I enjoyed that a lot. It then also has the more kind of geopolitical aspect to it, of talking about what that means today with Taiwan and some of our reliance on chips from there as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed it and recommend it for everyone, whether in Silicon Valley or outside.
Do you know what? Since you recommended that book, I did say I'm going to finish off with a book, but I do want to ask you something that I think is very much linked to this book as well. When we first met, you were in New York, and
Yep.
you're in Silicon Valley now. What is so special? In your opinion, I mean, I know what makes Silicon Valley special for me. And in fact, I recorded an episode yesterday where that's all we talked about. Just why Silicon Valley is such an amazing place. For you personally, you made that shift not only into the United States, but also from New York to San Francisco. Personally, for yourself, why do you find that this is the place to be to build great companies?
I mean, there's a lot of smaller reasons, but the biggest overarching reason is that to build the best possible company, it becomes a lot easier to do that when you're competing with where the other best companies are. And the reason that is true is because it's kind of like the concept of you don't want to be a big fish in a small pond, of kind of, if you're in a different market where there's not as many fast growing companies, because it's less competitive and there's less best practices, even the best outcomes are not as good as the best outcomes in the best market. And so Silicon Valley has traditionally just had this crazy network effect of kind of all going all the way back to the origins of the chip war book, and where the industry first emerged. It's where the biggest companies in technology happen to be. And so that also means that this is where the best practices are to do things in the best way, to scale the fastest, to raise the most capital, to hire the best engineers. And because all of that is concentrated, it's also self-reinforcing. And so even when COVID happened and Silicon Valley had a tougher time, or I guess nowadays a lot of it is just shifted to San Francisco, but where San Francisco and the Bay Area had a tougher time, it bounced back from that, and the people are still here. The city is thriving again. Yeah, recommend it for every founder who's building in software.
I absolutely agree. I think it's that period in 2020 during the pandemic. I remember many people, candidates and companies and investors, were leaving Silicon Valley. They were going to Austin. That became the new tech hub. They were going to different locations, even in Florida. But they all came back in the end, because there is something quite special. As you said, it's the competition, right? It's like you're in the NBA and you have to win, and you are up against other A players, and it just keeps pushing you, and it is super electrifying. I mean, I was in SF recently, and I saw your billboards everywhere, right? So it is this energy that has continuously transcended. David, it really has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time to sit with me today. Learned so much from you. I think just to sum up from my perspective as a customer, I think you've built an incredible product. Keep doing what you're doing. You're solving a problem for us, so definitely keep doing what you're doing, and hopefully you are also solving a problem for the industry in large.
Thanks so much for having me. This was really fun.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. This podcast is powered by Harrison Clark. For more episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. As always, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind.